for joining tonight. Welcome to Books and Bounty TV. You are now live in the Books and Bounty She Suite. Tonight we have very special guest Tim Fielder of Diesel Funk Studios. And if you stay tuned after the intermission, we'll have some live reviews of Zora Neale Hurston's Moses Man of the Mountain from this past weekend's readathon, as well as my first reactions to Laura Perez's Occultist. And we'll do some live reading of the Asiri and go through the weekend book haul from Solid State Book. All right, so to let you guys know a little bit about Tim before we get started, Tim is a native of Mississippi. He's an illustrator, cartoonist, animator, and OG Afrofuturist. He is the founder of Diesel Funk Studios, which is an intermedia storytelling company. He's an educator for institutions such as the New York Film Academy and Howard University. Tim has served clients such as Marvel, TriStar Pictures, Ubisoft Entertainment, and The Village Voice, and is known for his TED Talk on Afrofuturism. He won the prestigious 2018 Glyph Award. He has curated exhibits on Afrofuturism for the National Museum of African American History and Culture, and his work has been shown at Exit Art, NYU Gallatin Gallery, and the Hammons House Museum. The latter was a career retrospective titled, get this y'all, Black Metropolis, 30 Years of Afrofuturism, Comics, Music, Animation, Decapitated Chickens, Heroes, Villains, and Negroes. Welcome, Tim Fielder.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
So I'll try to keep the conversation fresh, but there are a few points that I really want to get across to the group. And one of that I wanted to talk about that I mentioned last week was that there are very few people in my life where first out the gate, when I read about them or hear about them, talk to them, I get the vibe of unapologetically Black. I get that from
Mm,
your artwork, from what folks have written about you,
right.
from how you've inspired others. So when I say that, or when someone says what it means to be unapologetically Black, how does that surface for you in your work?
Right. Well, I wish I could say it was something that was overtly forced. I've been a practicing Afrofuturist since I was 12, 13, 14 years old. So it was always something that I did, for better or worse. And I emphasize for better or worse. It didn't make me a wealthy person or any of that. It's just was a gear I started in and I stayed in. I've been in it my entire life. So being we didn't call it Afrofuturism back then. We just called it Black science fiction. But what it really was a compulsion to show people of color, Black folks, in speculative scenarios. I wanted to see, you know, Black men, Black women in outer space, and I remember I was thinking about our conversation from last week. I was thinking about this. I wanted to do this romance of this man and this woman, Black man, Black woman, and they were in this kind of orb ship, and they were nude, right? Because in space, in this kind of thing, you didn't have to dress in spaces, you know. And it's about this people and their relationship traveling from one space to the next. And I remember doing that back in I guess that had to be in the early, late 80s. I thought about doing something like that because you never see Black men and women in love in space. You never see it.
No.
I,
You rarely see it, the real kind, like anywhere. So
right.
I
You
mean,
don't see it.
yeah.
Exactly. And so my focus has always been trying to deal with those scenarios. So, like I see my book back there, Infinitum,
Mm.
an Afrofuturist tale. I was telling folks, because I'm a late starter or a late bloomer. I started pretty early, but late bloomer. And so that book is this long book and all of the different scenarios dealing with this main character who basically cannot die. The focus of the book was that I was tired of seeing Black characters die in movies and books, that either get killed right in the beginning before the credits finish or right at the end just before the final credits roll. That's always the case. And
Mhm.
always in the worst ways. They always got maimed, something horrible happened to them. But whatever had happened, it was always done to justify the white character generally getting some goal or being allowed to be their worst selves
It's a sacrifice in
in
something.
the spirit of justice.
Yep.
And black women were not shown at all. Now that's changed somewhat now, thank God. Sisters have taken much more responsibility about their place within speculative activity, and it shows. Brothers, we got a lot of work to do. We got a lot of work to do. So, infinitum, in a sense, was all of the at least 10 graphic novels that I didn't do over the last 30 years, all put into one book. So that was the idea.
And so I want to talk about that, the actual breadth of the story itself, and the
Mhm.
breadth of human expression, as you alluded to earlier. But I also wanted to talk about what has sort of brought you to this point. You talk about how there, um, women have been more on the forefront of speculative fiction. Tell me, and we talked about some others that have influenced you,
Sure.
as you have birthed the genre of Afrofuturism as being one of the OGs yourself. And tell me some about your influence, as you have grown, as your career has grown and flourished, because you hit on a point for me that brought me to speculative fiction, particularly as a black woman, and that is the idea of grasping of being an oppressed people and also being immortal. And I think that's something that only can be done in its truest honesty and form, I guess I want to say, with black science fiction. So tell me about how others in the genre have influenced you.
Right. Well, first of all, I'm not the only practitioner out there, specifically in comics. There's a bunch of old heads out there who've been doing Afrofuturism for many years. That I consider contemporaries. And so that's a good thing. That's a good thing. It's just that it was not necessarily a field where you could be an avowed Afrofuturist and be seen as legitimate within the industry. You know,
Mm-hmm.
at the same time, that was in comics, but in fields like literature, you always had your Samuel Delaney's and your Octavia Butlers and your Charles Saunders and your Stephen Barnes, I remember a documentary that was done back in the early '90s by this filmmaker called Terrence Francis
Mm-hmm.
called Black Sci-Fi,
Mm-hmm.
and Black Sci-Fi interviewed Octavia Butler, Sam Delaney, Nichelle Nichols, Stephen Barnes, and a brother by the name of Mike Sargent. Uh, and if you go online, you can see clips from it.
Mm-hmm.
But the interesting thing, they interviewed me and Floyd Hughes. This is like back in 1990, 91.
Mm-hmm.
But we were the only visual artists, and they cut us out of the documentary. So it's like that's the kind of experience I had as a practicing Afrofuturist, never really given that, the same level of credibility as other forms, understandably so in certain cases, and not so understandably, when you cut to 35 years later. So now what I've found in that time uh, is agency, not just claiming agency for your characters, but claiming agency for yourself.
And I think that,
So,
go ahead.
yeah, I remember when Black Metropolis, the show, the career retrospective first went up in 2016. Wow, almost 8 years ago. About 8 years, going on 9 years now. And it went up at New York NYU Gallatin Galleries, and Keith Miller and my brother Boston Fielder were the curators of that show. And and I've said this before in writing, and the curator, a young Asian lady, was looking through my work, and she started shaking, and me and my brother were looking at her. She said, "Oh my God, you're some kind of OG Afrofuturist." Uh, and I looked at her, knowing that she was shocked by what she was, because she was looking through my work, and a lot of that stuff is from the '80s, and
Thanks. Mm-hmm.
like decades old. And I looked at her, I said, "Yo, bro, did she just call me old?" And she was horrified
Oh.
because she did the one thing as a curator you're not supposed to do, which is insult the artist, right? But of course, I do. She didn't mean that. She was literally saying, getting excited and shaking by the fact it was like discovering a fossil, a living fossil. if you
Uh,
will.
If anything, it was the
So what I told her, I said, relax. It's true. I am old. Uh, and so the last 10 years have been about me reestablishing myself
mm,
within the arts community. That's the first thing. The second thing, I'm fortunate enough to be a part of an active Afrofuturist community
yes.
that has kind of, for lack of a better term, pulled me out of the ice and allowed me to feel comfortable in doing the work that I did in the past, where things were not so comfortable. But now I'm very comfortable, and I'm grateful to say that I am now accepted as part of my work as part of the Afrofuturist lexicon, and that's a huge deal for me after years and years and years of pretty rank obscurity, you know. So this whole process for me has been about activating agency within myself and recognizing how important it is to complete your work, physically complete it and emotionally complete it, but how important it is to deliver the work to the audience, because the most important thing is that the work should be seen.
So, and about getting the work out there in TV scene, I wanted to talk about two things. One, I want to talk about now that you're at this point, Diesel Funk Studios, Maddie's Rocket being one of the more famous, well-known titles. I think Infinitum is going to, is soon, if not soon, it is going to be rising to that level as well. Um, and future plans you have for Infinitum, because right after that, I want to talk about your current ongoing project about your interpretation of W.E. Du Bois science fiction, a short story, the comic, in
The
relation
comment,
to
yeah.
yeah. So, but first, let's talk a little bit about Diesel Funk Studios,
All
the
right.
struggles you had in building and founding your own organization, and what you expect out of it in the near future.
Well, life is struggle. Life is struggle. And that was something I was very naive about earlier in my life, not assuming that your job was just to drift aimlessly from one experience to the next. You're then to apply your modality to that experience. But life doesn't work that way. You know, what you have to do is actively create those experiences. And so I was fortunate enough, you know, I had attempted to do an adaptation of Samuel R. Delaney's Nova. I'd worked on that for many years, and through series of events, the project fell through. But this is all within the last 2 3 years, you know, and I put a lot of time, particularly into the latter edition, to try to bring that story to life. But sometimes what happens is you think things should go one way, but they end up going another way. And because that adaptation with Nova was very difficult to do, is to make sure everything was right, make sure everybody was on board, that type of thing. And it didn't happen. Maybe one day it will, but all of a sudden appeared the option to do W.B. Du Bois's The Comet, which is what I consider, like Nova, a forerunner story. It is a story that is clearly black. It is clearly science fiction. It has all the tropes that you would see, you know, in the case of the comet, post-apocalyptic, end of world scenarios. W.B. Du Bois was a contemporary of H.G. Wells, so I consider that one of the first post-apocalyptic stories, that like directly dealt with scientific phenomena. In this case, a bypassing comet. So I did it. I became friends with Arthur McFarlane, who was the grandson of W.B. Du Bois, who was gracious enough to give me his blessing to do the book.
Wow.
And I signed with W. Norton, guess about earlier this year, and I'll be finished sometime next year, and it should be out in 2016. I mean, 2026 should
Okay.
be out by then. Should have been finished 2 months ago, but the graphic history of hip hop, my latest graphic novel, has taken up way more time than anticipated. So yeah, right now where I am is I'm adapting the comic, and it's an honor to do that book. It's a short story; it's not very long.
Hmm.
You could read through it very quickly, and we had a kind of a a doing for Carnegie Hall. I've been participating with Carnegie Hall the last few years in their festivals, and the one I did was showcasing the comic
Oh, wow.
and the work I had done on it. And had Ahmed Best who actually did a reading of
Mhm.
the comic, which you can go online and see it with some of my artwork. But yeah, so it's been a kind of a full circle moment. And I'm grateful to be doing it. It's just, it's like with anything, you got to focus and get through it.
So I want to talk about the comment because it was something I noticed. And let's take a pause break here. You guys go follow Tim Fielder at Diesel Funk. You see it on your screen right now, his tag. And on YouTube, you can find him under the same handle where you can, as he just mentioned, uh, listen to a live reading of W.E. Du Bois' The Comet. Now, one thing that I noticed and that I mentioned in the review of Infinitum, as well as when I talked about some of my first impressions, and that was your technique of light and shadow. Again, if you
Mhm.
go see Tim's social media, you can see some clips of his process. And one of the last finishing, touches that he puts on there is the emphasis of the highlights, the shadow, and the light. Now, the masterpiece in that you've done in Infinitum. The light and shadow hits you straight off the bat. It becomes its own character, and without it, the story in of itself is not the same, right? In Du Bois's short story, the effect of the multitude platitude of noise with
Mhm.
the contrast of silence is
Mhm.
so loud, is so in your face. Like
Sure.
I am so curious of how you plan to interpret that into graphic art. So tell me a little bit more about your technique and how that has changed over time and how it's important to the actual story in Infinitum.
Right. Well, for every project I do, I try to have it have its own thematic path. And that path is obviously visual and with the written word because it's graphic novels, and graphic novels is all about the dance between the written word and the picture. And with Infinitum, the idea was to do a big, epic book, do something that's huge, that's big, that's epic, that's sweeping across different time frames. It's like the most expensive movie never made, is the way I view Infinitum, right? Whereas with the Comet, what I wanted to do as best as I could, since it's an adaptation, I am literally trying my best to get inside W.E.B. Du Bois's head and to tell the story visually in a way that will uh, not only put people in the period because the story was published in the 1920s in 1920, so I'm kind of like giving it that 1920s 1930s aesthetic, pre depression aesthetic.
Okay.
uh but that means usage of sepia tone is going to be much more heavily used this time. Also, I would say because it is a period piece, that it's important that a lot of the tropes that you see in films from that area, the kind of degraded image, with a little noise in it. I want to be able to do that, and of course, I want it to be my trademark style, where it looks old and painted, but I'm obviously using as much technology as I can, as I've been completely digital for the last 25 years. And I think what it does, it gives me the opportunity to make Du Bois's story bigger. I mean, the writing was already amazing, but now I have to be able to tell the story visually and to be able to do it big. For example, when the main character gets out from the vault, I won't, reveal too many spoilers, but when he realizes that everybody outside the building where he's at is dead, well, there's hundreds of thousands of people just dead.
It is
So
grisly.
how do you show that?
Mm-hmm.
how do you show that? And I have to not just show it physically what's going on, but I also have to convey it emotionally through the character because the audience is viewing what's going on through that character's perspective. So I have to be able to show the angst, the fear, the horror, and the way the main character is thinking, "Oh God, everybody in the building is dead. They're gonna think I did it because I'm a black man." But when he goes out, he sees this is so much bigger than that, so much more, even horrified, which is part of what the philosophy of the comet is about. It's about transcending race, at least
And
for a moment.
for that, I think that that's one of the key things that I realized there, at least for a moment, about this,
Mhm.
even throughout all this horror. And it is quite horrific. It is a very dark story, right? And everywhere
It
I
is not a
looked,
happy tale.
it is not a happy tale. Everywhere I looked, I kept writing down, what's Tim going to do with this part? Oh my goodness, am I even going to be able to look at what he's going to create for this? It is, and I laughed because it made me the nervous. That was a nervous laugh, right? Because I want everyone to be serious that this is a serious exercise in looking at our struggle with race relations, as
Mhm.
well as what it means to love one another. Despite the gruesomeness of the story. And I'm going to talk a little bit more in the upcoming half about my take on the comment without giving too much away, because
Sure.
it really is. I'm really excited to see what you do with this, and I think you're going to be able to. I know you will are going to do so much justice. But I mean, man, like the contrast between silence and sound. I think I kind of counted just using the word silence alone like 22 something times, not to mention like
Sure.
all the other ways he puts that into metaphor and in prose. So I'm really looking forward to that. Now, you mentioned that you have been a graphic digital artist for over a couple decades now. On a
Yeah, I
recent
started. I went completely digital in 97, 98.
on a recent episode of your own podcast and show that you have at Diesel Funk on YouTube, the Comic Cometh Talks, you talked about the use of AI in art and how to ethically use it. And we discussed this a little bit yesterday, but I think it was really important how you use AI as a tool and not a supplement. So if
Mhm.
you could talk to our viewers a bit about how you ethically use AI in your art and elsewhere.
Well, first of all, when you use the word ethics and AI, that's
Yes.
already a bit of a
Yes.
misnomer there.
Mhm.
All the work was great. My work was great. Everybody's work was great. However, that's no different than these. I'm using a Mac here. This Mac was in part built by abusive labor practices, slave labor. But that doesn't mean I'm gonna stop using this laptop. You know, GPS. No one gave permission for someone to take photos and to map my private property, but we would never give up GPS because GPS is so helpful, right? So helpful, right? So it's like it's one of those things where you begin to understand that part of what it is that we are doing as operators, as an Afrofuturist, is I am embracing technology and finding a way where I can move my stories forward in the medium of my choice, but doing it in a way where I show by example how one can utilize technology to move the form forward. And that is not the easiest thing to do. It is a burden to do it, because there's so much understandable angst and fear about the technology because it is uh, pretty disruptive. There will be job loss, there will be loss of companies and industries
Mhm.
that will happen. Anyone who says, well, no, these people shouldn't be afraid. Oh, no, you should be very afraid. It's just that as an operator, in the same thing, I went through the same thing when digital illustration happened and I moved from drawing on pencil and painting and gouache and watercolor and marker, and I moved to Photoshop. and and fractal paint, or what they called it at the time. Now I exclusively use Clip Studio Paint and Photoshop for my illustration work. But at the same time, I employ game engine technology. I don't want to have to draw all those damn buildings for the comic. So what did I do? I partnered up with someone who is a fantastic Unreal Engine operator, and I paid him to construct New York City circa
Amazing.
1930. Right? Because
That's
I don't want to
amazing.
have to draw all that.
That's like a
Now I'm gonna
so
have to.
cool, like Afrofuturist collab right there, right? And um,
Well, yeah, that's what we have to do. That's the job.
hmm
I don't know how else to put it. That's the job. My job, once one of my friends told me, because I actually physically built Maddie's rocket. The rocket actually physically, you can rotate it. You can the hatch will let down. You can walk up the steps. You can walk in it. You can go to a cockpit chair with the console. There's even a part in the back where the engine is like this kind of souped up warp drive. And it's not a large rocket. It's like a small hauler. And he said, "Well, why'd you do that? Couldn't you just draw it?" I'm like, "Build once, use infinitely." And that's the idea. So, as a digital illustrator, my job has always been to take technology and extract what I need from it to do my work. I'm not interested in AI doing the work
Yeah.
uh, for me from start to finish. I use AI only to add rendering to my drawings. That's it. My drawings always start with my drawings as the image prompt.
hmm hmm
I have zero interest in my work looking like someone else's work. That's incredibly boring. I never start with a text prompt. I always start with an image prompt, which is my drawing. And from there, AI, once well, actually, the program that I use now, Viscom, automatically generates a prompt based upon the drawing or that I put into it. So I have to edit that just a little bit, to suggest lighting, because what I'm interested in doing is having the software add photographic phenomena to my drawings. And from there, I take that output and I open it up in Photoshop and Clip Studio Paint, and paint normally. So the work that I do in AI when I do my illustrations these days lasts all of 5 minutes. It takes literally, once the image is drawn, I have to draw it out, make sure everything's composition is good, if there are tones in it. And I have to go through that process and do that manually using my 32-inch Cintiq here in Photoshop and Clip Studio Paint. Once I get it into the software, where it takes maybe it's imported instantaneously as soon as you drag and drop it, to edit the prompts, the written prompts that come up take what, another minute, maybe 2 minutes, and the rendering takes 10 seconds. And that rendering, that part would take 4 or 5 hours. But in this case, it literally happens in 10 seconds.
I can tell you the
So
ren.
it allows me to be able to work and
Mhm.
not die. Infinitum, I almost, that was almost the last book that I was going to do, because every page of that was basically drawing from scratch, painting in the computer, making alterations, uh, employing reference acquisition, all those type of things to make something that looked like a painting, but it was actually completely digital. But I will never do another book, not like that, or I'll be dead. My arms are gonna fall off. And I can't use profanity, but I got stuff to do.
Passion, that painstakingly, hard effort that Tim put into Infinitum, you can see it fully expressed. And let me tell you, Black people, when I talk about the full expression of our humanity in graphic novel form, y'all need to check out Infinitum. It was my first uh, formal review of a graphic novel. I'm
Thank
so
you.
glad that I was introduced by this book by a young man who goes by at Graham.world. He works at Midtown Man Comics up in Manhattan, New York. And so shout out to Midtown Comics and everyone else who's been so gracious in the graphic novel world, Tim, as this is new to me, being a traditional reader of novels. But as someone who is a fan of Black science fiction in literature form, I'm so grateful to have this experience being introduced to graphic novels with Infinitum. I could not have asked for a
Thank you.
better first pick. Um,
Thank you.
and so I always
Means a lot to hear you say that. Thank you.
it really does, and I really can't wait to see what else is coming. And I have to talk to you about. I know you guys can head to timfielder.com and look at some other titles that are coming out of Diesel Funk Studios, including Maddie's Rocket. And I need to talk to you about that because I want to order one, but I want a signature from you. And so we always leave our guests with the question of recommending to the audience a bookish thing, other folks in the genre that you would other recommend. But I also want you to give sort of any lasting tips to um, artists, especially graphic artists, cartoonists, and illustrators who intend to either be self-publishing or trying to get signed to a major publisher. We have a lot
Hmm.
of up and coming, especially Black authors and artists
Hmm.
that watch the show.
That's actually a very, very timely question. I was actually talking, answer your questions, the two questions you have, kind of at the same time. One of the people I would recommend is Greg Anderson Elise, who does Isnana, the Were Spider. Writer, very ambitious and massively productive. An all around a good guy. Good guy. And he called me, reached out to me the other day and asked me because he's about to go live with a Kickstarter in a few weeks. He wanted me to do one of the variant covers, and of course, it'd be my honor to because I have a great deal of respect for the dude. But I was talking with him about how, as an operator right now, I have to balance between having a mainstream book deal and publishing through my own company. I find it is very helpful to do both. Having a book deal is great, but in some ways, it's not all it's made out to be. You know, it is very, very similar in certain ways to the record industry,
Yeah.
meaning that, like with musicians, you can get a record deal, but you could also go your own way and build your own fan base. And to that end, that gets, so there are different ways you can go. The most important thing is the work be finished. Finishing, I've said this before and I'll say it again a billion times. Finishing activates opportunity. When you finish your work and you deliver it to market, it allows people you don't even know to see your work, right? But what you have to do, and this is something I struggle with, I'm not some master at it, you must consistently finish and consistently deliver to audiences, to readers. And that is how you build your bibliography because only you are responsible for your bibliography. Nobody's going to do it for you. The work's not going to magically do itself. You
Mm-hmm.
literally have to go in there and do the heavy lifting yourself. Now, you can use technology to make certain aspects of it easier, which is what I do. But at the same time, you still, you find yourself having to work harder in other areas. You know what I mean? It's like one of the things about 3D objects is that it's too clean. You have to literally go in and paint into those renderings to make that object dirtier. So I say that is that the most important thing is complete your work, finish your work, deliver to market. Understand at the end of the day, all of this work is supposed to be fun. It's supposed to be fun. We're not trying to save the world. We're trying to entertain the world. When you understand that being an operator, particularly in books and films and animation, you're in the show business industry. So there's that show and then there's that business. So it's really a combination of the two. So the thing I'm really getting into, like I do a lot of media on my work. I do a lot of, I'm in the media at least to a certain extent, but to the point where I've been able to get some level of positive positioning in the industry. However, uh, I need to become more active on Twitch and YouTube because I have to really, really spend a lot of time on building my personal brand. So beyond doing the work, it's about also doing building the brand. People say, well, why is that important? Well, for some people, it's not important, but for me, it is because I run my company. So part of my responsibility is to make sure that my company is known. If no one knows about your product, they won't know to get your product. And it
Exactly.
is on you and solely you to promote and showcase and market your work. Okay. And that's pretty much it. And by the way, last thing, it's a marathon. It's not a race.
Look, don't we know it? Don't we know
Some
it?
people don't. Some
You
people
gotta
don't.
say it again. Say it again. It's a marathon,
It's a
not a race.
marathon. It's not a
We
race.
and if anything, this past political season has taught us that we know it's a marathon and not a race. You got to keep at it. You got to keep at it.
Exactly.
Um, well,
As
Tim,
Toni Morrison said, now's the time for us to really produce the work.
that's what. Look, go ahead. Quote one of the goats. That's what I'm talking
I'm
about.
gonna, I'm gonna butcher her quote, but she said, "Now's the time for us not to be silent." Now is exactly the time that we have to produce. So, as an Afrofuturist, it is more important now for my work to be produced and seen than ever at any point, probably now.
Yes,
All
and
right.
I'm gonna recommend this book far and wide. I really, really want this to get into the hands of Black men, Black young men. But like I know we talked earlier about how and I actually have some young ladies from the Pink Riot comic show coming in a couple weeks to teach me more about graphic novels, and that Afrofuturism is saturated by Black women writers. It can be at times. It could feel that way. But
Mhm.
this book to me, I think, again, showing that full human expression. And
Sure.
although this is a tragic story, it teaches a lot of lessons. And it also teaches, um, I think, whether at fault or in triumph, um, that inherent leadership, um, that we yearn for in our community. And I really appreciate this book.
Thank you.
Excuse me, I'm tripping over my words here. I need to take some of my water. Tim Fielder of Diesel Funk Studios, thank you so much for being a part of
Thank
Books
you
and
for
Bounty
having
TV
me.
tonight. Um, I'll hit you up a little bit in the messages. We're about to go on intermission. So everyone sit tight for a moment. And Tim, again, thank you so much for being part of
Thank you
Books
for
and Bounty.
having me.
You guys go follow Diesel Funk.
Peace.
Tonight. Thank you for tuning in here at Books and Bounty TV. I'm going to take a quick break. Go ahead and refill your tea. But while I have you here, let me give a few announcements. First, thank you to our partners. You'll see them scrolling across your screen too soon. This includes BeMoreNews.com, owned and operated by the illustrious Donnie Glover, home of the Emmy nominated Donnie Glover Show, weekdays at 9. Make sure you head on over to BeMoreNews.com and sign up for the newsletter, as well as check out information on the Black Wall Street Soiree. The Black Wall Street Soiree is a culminating event of the Joe Mann's Black Wall Street Awards series, hosted by Donnie Glover and others. This award celebrates Black entrepreneurship and those who support it. So make sure you check out BeMoreNews.com and let them know that Steph sent you. I also want to give a warm shout out to JNF Enterprises, home of Dr. LJ Speaks, also known as Dr. Leroy McKenzie Jr. Dr. McKenzie has been a valuable advisor to Books and Bounty, as well as a partner in growing events that I am excited to tell you about soon. You can check him out at Dr. LJ Speaks on Instagram and TikTok. In the second part of our show, after the intermission, we'll have some live reviews, including Laura Perez's Occultus, which is the one of the next graphic novels we'll be reading in our November-December series. We'll also get a review. I'll give a review of Moses, Man of the Mountain by Zora Neale Hurston. If you were following along this weekend, I hosted my first readathon in an effort to raise money to attend the Zora Neale Hurston Summit 2025. So we'll talk about that. We'll also talk about what we discussed in the book club this past Sunday. We'll also look through a weekend haul from Solid State Books, where I picked up a special score by recommendation of at Eminism, also known as Emma Akpan. You can check out her highlights from Books and Bounty TV from a couple of weeks ago. As well as I'm going to give a shout out to Elevation Global Media Group in Baltimore, Maryland, which is owned and operated by a team of stellar Black women. And to remind you, and as we get closer to Small Business Saturday and Cyber Monday, I'll be highlighting some bookish businesses here in the Baltimore, Maryland region, as well as some online small bookish businesses that I would like you to check out. So remember to support your local bookish businesses, indie booksellers, and more. Uh, Take a moment, refill your tea, and I'll see you guys back here in the live studio shortly.